Pharmaceutical Processing, in conjunction with INTERPHEX 2016, presents INTERPHEX Live.
So our next topic for INTERPHEX Live today is aseptic facility challenges, sterility by design. I like that topic, guys. Very good. Okay, so we have with us is Les Edwards, Regional Director from SKAN, Sterling Kline, a good friend of mine, also one of my colleagues from IPS, and Pat Poisson, Senior VP, and as I've been informed, Chief Manufacturing Officer, as opposed to CMO. I don't know when that change came up. I got to keep up. And with United Therapeutics. Okay, so let's lead off. So Les, you're on a bubble here.
All
so
right,
what are the most important principles in designing an aseptic manufacturing facility? Let's start with that one, all right?
Well, that's a simple question.
Yeah, right, okay.
So the most important things, I have my own top 10 list, but the number one is always looking at the product and the process. So you want to start off with that and build your facility around it whenever possible. Now, a lot of times you have constraints, obviously, where you might be going into an existing facility. But the key principles here are always look at your process and try to build your systems around that and try to support that with a good structured disciplined design process. So I'll let my other colleagues embellish upon some of those particular items.
Okay, surprisingly, the biggest issue we see is a lack of connection between the senior management of the company and the people doing the project. And so that what we do on all projects at the very beginning is make sure everybody has agreement of what the business plan for the corporation is and how this project fits in within that business plan. So does it require flexibility for growth in the future, or what are the products that are coming along? Are they going to add potents, or some other items that would adjust what the design was from the very beginning? And then, obviously, as Les alluded to, the most important thing is you're in business to make product. So what is the product? What are the products that you're going to make? What are the attributes of those products? How difficult are they to make? And what is the process to make them? So as an architect, a lot of my peers look at me as a heretic because I say the building isn't that important. It's a necessary evil. It's the shell around the process. It creates the environment that you require around that process.
I think it's important that the information from development is also, Sterling, you and I think we ran that one presentation we gave a couple of years ago where it was like, when you came up and said, wow, I wish somebody had told me that when I was so let's talk about that a minute. It sounds to me like the information's got to bubble up from the guys who actually developed the product to make sure that this whole facility thing is working together. Les, where are we at with stuff like that? What has been your experience? When you guys go in to talk to a client, are you talking to the development guys, or who are you talking to?
It really depends on what stage the product is in. So, ideally you want to go into a commercial manufacturing facility with all the product knowledge that there is to know. The reality is that it's not there. One of the goals when I used to be in contract manufacturing, I had a contract development and manufacturing organization where we tried to get very deep into the product manufacturability. So we had because we're still in late stage clinical phases or mid stage clinical phases, we're able to actually tweak some of the formulation processes and look on the longer term to make the product manufacturable and scalable by simple things that you could do up front in your design and development, even to the point of picking your components and looking, which is not only just a logistics and medical issue, but it is also a marketing issue as well. So you have to get all members of the team in there to understand the vision of the product.
Yeah, well, there's the facility, the building, and then there's this, as we always say, there's the box, the stuff that goes in the box, and then the stuff we deal with that's in the box. Okay. Let me ask you this, Sterling. So we're, on efficiencies. Productivity problems. That's got to architecture and layout and all that's got to have a significant effect on not only the design of aseptic but overall productivity.
Yeah.
So where are you at with that when you deal with your folks?
That is the key point. And so close friend, late friend, Frank Eacock, who used to run the operations of Merck, used to say, you get what you reward. And R&D is typically rewarded with getting the product out as fast as possible. You've only got a certain time with your patent, so the faster you get it out. So the efficacy of the product, let's say freeze-dry cycle, the time isn't spent at that point. So manufacturing folks end up with, let's say, a week-long freeze-dry cycle. All of a sudden you have to add extra freeze dryers, impacts the budget of the project. Folks hadn't thought through that. So all of those play together. And again, that's coming out of the development side.
All right, while we're on that subject, so what do you think the current trends are in locating aseptic manufacturing and the facilities that go with them? I mean, bottom line, is that where are they picking, where are they going, what are we building, you know? I mean, you obviously are out
Yep.
there.
Yep, all three of us are.
So who take a run at it? Pat, we haven't heard from you yet.
Sure. So I think for a brief while we saw some offshoring of some manufacturing. I think in the last few years we've seen that start to come back into the U.S. More so. There's a lot of smaller CMO operations that have opened up over the past couple of years. So I think with some of the changes out there, specifically in the need to manufacture orphan drugs, we're seeing a lot more interest in keeping that stateside. So there are some newer facilities that have started up. So I think that's a positive sign, certainly for the U.S.
So is that opening up this opportunity for modular, where you put the stuff in a big box and stick it on a plane, you fly it, and you can start up anywhere? I mean, that's got to be where the trend is now. What would you think?
I think certainly modular is where it's at, where you can customize to fit a certain need. Our facility has some modular features to it, and it's a big benefit. It gives you a lot of flexibility. And Sterling touched a little bit on future growth, and I think where a lot of companies suffer is they don't think hard enough about what's going to be happening 5 to 10 years down the line, and it's always a challenge to predict that. But I see many facilities that are trying to add capabilities in spaces that weren't necessarily meant for it, and they struggle with that. So I think as you're building a facility or looking at modifying one, always think about what do we need to be doing 5 to 10 years from now? What might that be? And you won't be right all the time, but if you're mindful of it, you can set yourself up for success later on down the line.
Well, let me ask you that again. I mean, let me. So a prefab module. So these things are definitely stuff that's viable and it's ongoing. This is it?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All right. So where does the current technology advances come in? How do they play into the module of this construction?
Well, historically, from the time of college, I've been a fan of modular for quite a few things. For aseptic, historically, I have not been. Because, as I mentioned, you design around the process, and modular forces the process into a box. And so historically, what can fit over the road is what the issue was. So shipping containers are what you tried to force it into. That is not a module that typically works with aseptic processing. One of the companies out here, Kline, now has a flexible layout that you can do, and modules of 8'6" and 12 feet. And so 2 12-foot containers, that's the width of a filling line, the room for a filling line. And you put a couple in length, that would work out very well. Formulation rooms will work with an 8.5 and a 12 together. The corridors are the 8.5. So all of a sudden, all the components, component prep are 2 8.5s together. Gowning rooms, material airlocks work on that. So with that whole approach, now it is viable. One issue historically has been freeze dryers. They don't fit in the vertical space. So you come up to that point and then you have the freeze dryer not in the module, behind the module. So technology has broken through just in the past couple of years on the thought process.
Okay, let me ask you this, Les or Pat. I mean, we talk about technology, solids guy, you know. I mean, isolation I worry about with high potency. Where's isolation technology or isolators? Where is this with this whole, how does this fit into the modular format here? I mean, it's obviously a big progression here.
Yeah, so from SKAN, it's been a huge seller for us, working with a couple of filling line companies with focused on small scale, even up to medium scale manufacturing using these modular isolator systems. And the key to that is not so much, creating the process. There is creating enough flexibility in a standard process, because for certain liquids, filling a vial is filling a vial. When you get into, very specialized products, it may not lend itself to that. But one of the things that we've been working on for the last, especially 5 years, it's really caught on, is modular processing, where you can have different unit operations in a small 4-glove box, okay? And again, this goes totally counter to some of my earlier statements about process. If they work with that box, then you can standardize and do something in a much more cost-effective manner. You talk about, some of the earlier comments you mentioned about, whereas manufacturing was going overseas. A lot of manufacturing was also going down south, where, they had lower labor rates and fewer unions and things like that. I have found a big resurgence in New Jersey, Massachusetts, the Northeast manufacturing corridor, where all the classic manufacturers were before, that were all fleeing the States. They seem to be coming back, especially small, fast, flexible companies who are interested in these modular isolator type technologies, not necessarily because they want to build the biggest gigantic plant and have 1,000 people working there, but because they want to be fast and flexible. They have a lot of new products that require very small batches, and they want to take control over their own manufacturing process. So if they can control that whole chain, then they can have a successful launch of their product.
I think that's an important point. I mean, several of the conversations we've had today with biointensification, also in continuous, is the old modular, is the old scale out, don't scale up. It sounds to me like this whole aseptic facility, I'd rather have 3 the same without trying to make one big giant one. Number one, I got to get it over the road, okay? Having said that though, are there limitations with all the new isolator technology? How do you get this implemented? Is there any stumbling blocks there, Pat? I mean, you're actually out there making it, so what has been the problem? Has there been a problem?
I think, starting up any aseptic process is challenging, and certainly isolators bring a level of sophistication to that operation really unmatched. So certainly, yes, it's always a challenge. They're sensitive pieces of equipment, but the benefits are real. Okay, and I can tell you that as an operator of a barrier isolator. I will tell everybody here, in 7 years, we've spent 0 labor hours investigating environmental excursions. Okay, that's a big advantage. We spend our time making product, and that's what we're here to do. I also think with the modular concepts, the move is to eliminate people from the process. And the modular concepts allow you to do that very easily, and they're adaptable. So that's why I think we're seeing more and more of a move in that area. And certainly what Les mentioned about some of the smaller platforms, they're very good fits for the modular processes, where you can roll, say, a fill line underneath an isolator, switch from vials to pre-filled syringes very quickly. And we're seeing a definite move in that area.
So Sterling, let me ask this: what are have there been breakthroughs in this? I mean, I think of again isolators, but obviously there's got to be sectors and segments of this that technology's moved ahead. Yeah. What's been your sense on that?
Well, there's a number of things. With the scale's dropped off. A lot of the products, large volume, small value, is disappearing. It's going to small volume, high value, and so they can scale down and have these smaller facilities. When I was at Bristol Myers in charge of the sterile strategy, the investment in a traditional large aseptic facility is so large you can't have redundancy and backup. So folks were going to CMOs. So there's a lot of growth in small CMOs that have the flexibility to make these products. The new thing is compounding pharmacies, or now the 503Bs, which are outsourcing facilities that are being driven now by folks that understand pharmaceuticals and not pharmacists. And so from that standpoint, we have a number of clients now that are looking to get into the technology, not making product in booths where it's easy to contaminate it, but get the operator away from it and get it into isolators or Rabbs from that standpoint. So that technology has really been driven to that point.
Yeah, I'm always amazed with the guy thinking that he can pick up the components from his pharmacy stores, bring it and put it in a laminar flow hood, and he's good.
Yeah.
Somehow I'm not following that logic, but okay, yeah, I can see that. So you see that. So let me ask you that. I mean, this is something, Pat, you talked about personalized medicine or this is where the isolators are also starting to be really picked up.
Well, yeah, and I think Sterling mentioned compounding pharmacies. Really advantageous for those types of operations. Aseptic processing in a conventional operation, very sensitive, very high risk. Clearly these facilities weren't particularly good at doing that. The isolator gives you a lot more room for error in that there are no people in contact with sterile product or sterile components. I think the changes or movement towards smaller scale isolators is really helpful for them. They're making small batches. They're having to change over very quickly, different formats, different container closure combinations. So some of the newer compounding pharmacies that have opened up over the year have really grasped onto isolator technology as the technology of choice for aseptic manufacturing.
Okay, so how does single use play into this? It's obviously got to be a terrific supplement to the whole approach then.
Yeah, and single use is very interesting, very common in the upstream biotech processes, cell culture and purification, much more prevalent there. However, we're starting to see a lot more people on the drug product side move into disposables. We use a disposable setup in our facility, and again, very, very helpful in that we can stockpile these systems. It eliminates cleaning validation, eliminates contamination issues. So as far as the validation goes, it simplifies it a lot. We've also found that they're very adaptable. We use the same single-use disposable setup to fill 5 ml up to 50 ml vials with no change. So we built this system customized for our operation that has taken a lot of validation out. It's compressed our timelines for startup. So I do think over time it'll become commonplace to have single-use disposable setups. And even on the cost of the fill line itself, it eliminates the CIP, SIP process. Again, making the fill lines a little less complex. So definite advantages there.
Okay, I'll ask Les and Sterling the same question, and you can talk. So I want to use single-use technologies. Is that something I got to design into my facility before I start? Or is that something I got to envision? It sounds to me like you kind of retrofit. I don't know if I got that right, but let me. So you're advising.
Not so much anymore. So probably the last 30 filling lines that I've done have all been single-use technology within them. It's the formulation tank is the only. So with bio facilities, the whole upstream has gone to single-use. The fill finish in the tank or in the filler is all single-use, but they're still using stainless tanks in majority of the facilities. But also on the single use, where we're seeing it is in CMOs, where as Pat said, from the cleaning validation, it's very important. And if you're about to make a product at your CMO and you don't know what they just made, you're much more comfortable if they have single use and have thrown away the product contact parts that had just touched your product. The other issue is around potent products. And so from that standpoint, the cleanup is dramatically faster. So if you're doing BSL-2 facilities or cytotoxic facilities, or now we're seeing it with the new ADC facilities. So you have the cytotoxic and the biologic together. We're seeing the single use in the filler, but also now isolators for the formulation.
You want to weigh in on that?
Absolutely. I mean, 10 years ago, our classic project was a large-scale filling line with a CIP, SIP system built into the filling pumps and things. And today, I would say less than half of our projects are like that, of that classic. And even those large-scale lines are using the single-use disposables quite a bit. What we're seeing a lot more is the marrying of the biologics. Biologics processes, not just fill finish, but also a lot of the therapeutics and other personalized medicine type projects and products that are come on board, where you take a sample from a patient and you need to process that, end up with, at the end, maybe 10, 15, 20 doses of a drug that is personalized for that particular patient that goes back to that patient. Well, you need a small, highly efficient manufacturing operation to do that. You cannot effectively, you maybe even effectively can clean in between, but you certainly can't prove it, and you don't have time to do all the clearance work and proper quality testing in between each patient, right? But the advent of single-use disposables makes that possible and makes that safe. And so we're marrying these technologies as we're reducing in scale, and it's being very interesting.
That's interesting. Let me ask Pat. Let me ask you this question. Obviously, from a development standpoint, I'd love to be able, if I can do my scale and I put my clinical study in one set and that's it, and that's what I'm going to take to commercial. Being in that case, how many of these people never really, in other words, you got single use in the clinical development, you got single use. I mean, is that something that you see as a carryover? What I'm trying to say is, the idea is I want to make it once, and that's got to be as close to what I want to launch as possible. It's fast to market, right? So let me ask you that. In the prevalence in clinical studies, stuff like that, people come through the door, what's that single use? Good, high, low?
I would say it's even better in pre-commercial. I mean, in those cases, oftentimes you're continuing to do development in clinical manufacturing, and these systems are so flexible that they can handle that. And another point I failed to mention was that with these systems, and one of the concerns I've always heard with isolators is, well, that I can't turn the line around fast enough. Well, with the single-use disposables, you're eliminating two fairly lengthy steps in the CIP-SIP process. And the time it takes to remove this system and put another one in is measured in minutes. Really, the advantages, again, going back to your question around pre-commercial, I think you could ask any manufacturing person if they would love to have something that they can fill any vial with, and they'd say, yeah. And that's what these things are, properly designed. I mean, we had to design ours. There wasn't one readily available when we started up. So ours was custom designed for our line, but it wasn't terribly difficult to do, and there are firms out there that'll put it together for you. And really that's what we did. So we buy it from a third party. They worked with us on design, and we continue to buy it from them today.
Well, I got to tell you, from having spent majority of my career in large pharma like you guys, most people that owned and cultivated their own aseptic facility in-house for development, they've walked away from them. And if they come back, it's pretty much, what can I fit in an isolator and be done with it? I mean, that has been where I've seen it. So I would imagine the CMO's got to be going up, and so let me. And not only that, on the owner side, what do you see putting in for a development aspect? Where don't they do that now?
Yeah, well, the development is where it should happen. A lot of the folks that have been trying to break in new technology, new types of filling lines, new components, we're focusing on the manufacturing folks. And at that point, the products have already been filed. They're not going to refile them for a new setup. And so we've been telling those equipment vendors to go out and work with the development folks and have the product started with that and submitted and approved with that technology.
This orphan drug thing, I mean, that's, believe it or not, I mean, what surprises me, there's people actually go after this because it's become a very attractive market for guys. So I think we had talked about it briefly before. What, as a CMO, where are we at with this? I mean, you got to be having guys banging down the door with orphan drugs. Where's it at?
Well, I think as companies come under pressure to continue to add products, a lot of market factors have pushed companies to look hard at orphan drugs. Whereas maybe 10 to 15 years ago, people weren't looking at them. As the markets become saturated and generic competition continues to ramp up, companies are forced to look at new segments. And orphan drugs really offer that today. And there are several companies that's the focus of their business now.
Right. I mean, there's companies that actively go after a orphan indication as a business strategy.
Yeah, and it can be fairly lucrative if done correctly. And FDA is offering certain incentives to make products for unmet needs that didn't exist before. The voucher program, which has been in the news, has benefited in driving new products out there. So we've seen a big movement there. A lot of these companies are so small they don't have manufacturing operations, driving growth in the CMO contract manufacturing business for contractors to supply services for those companies. So I've seen half a dozen smaller contract manufacturers open up over the last 3 to 5 years to serve that market. And a lot of them are looking for flexible platforms, the isolators, the single-use disposable technologies. So it all plays into one another.
Okay. Let me ask you this then. I mean, I'll start with Les. I mean, so I'm going to put in single use. I'm going to put in I mean, how do you get the guys on board? What kind of training is involved? And I'll get to you, obviously, but I want to see it from an engineering standpoint. I mean, what's been your experience? I mean, is this a major problem? I mean,
well, getting the technology into an older facility is typically more challenging than doing it from the beginning. So if you can, challenge the operators and challenge the staff within the organization to embrace the new technology, they quickly see the benefits of it, and they realize, why was I doing it the old way before, and I'm never going back there again. As a person who's spent a lot of time in, working in isolators and a heck of a lot of time in conventional clean rooms, I don't like getting gowned up anymore. It's not fun, and and I avoid it at all costs. And things like that, I'll call them quality of life issues as you're manufacturing these products, make a big difference. And the advent of single-use disposables, the advent of isolation technology, and other automation has really leveraged the talents of the individuals, gets them focused on not the menial tasks of manufacturing a product, but focusing on the end product and making sure that they're doing a high-quality job on what they're executing.
so what have you been seeing? So, I mean, how easily is this the transition? I mean, either one. Pat, you seem to be chomping at the bit there. Go ahead.
It's a steep learning curve when a company puts in an isolator for the first time. I will tell you that the people who get very good at running those things have jobs for the rest of their lives. It's a skill set, much like people who are lyophilizer people. There's a lot of nuances, but if you get good at running it, and we're still learning today, honestly. I mean, we've been running ours for some time now, and we continue to learn about how it works and better ways to use it and better ways to run it. It's always happening, but it does take a lot of training to get there. But the people are good at it. They're worth their weight in gold, really.
projects?
I think it's an issue not just with isolators, but in terms of all projects. Where we find the biggest failure in projects from the owner's side is not staffing up appropriately, so ramping up as the project goes. So they're not making product as it's starting, but as it's installed, as they're doing the FATs, they don't have the team that's going to operate it assigned yet because they don't want to carry those salaries for the year or so that they wait for the FDA to come and inspect it. And so from that standpoint, there is a disconnect, and the folks that usually run it, for most corporations, show up just before it starts. And so it's a massive ramp up than what should be a long learning curve.
Right, and those are usually the guys who scurry trying to validate after they get approval, rather than trying to build that into the timeline ahead, right?
Right.
It's faster time to peak sales, not faster time to submission, the last time I checked.
Well, in our transition, the operations folks in our facility perform the FAT, they perform the validation. So we moved right into operations seamlessly, really. And some of that was not by design, but just by fact of what we had available. But it actually worked out to our benefit to have that happen. So there was no technology transfer between staffs. So we were able to get our line up and running very quickly. And we achieved FDA approval of a brand new aseptic filling facility in 18 months from certificate of occupancy, which I think speaks to the hard work of a lot of people in our operation.
So I have your favorite question, Sterling, and this is the one you always like. So Rabbs or Isolator, which one's at the front runner right now?
We're seeing, actually, folks know that I have a strong preference for isolators, so most of my clients are clients with isolators. But actually, I have a team that trains all the FDA inspectors on barrier technology. And we look at Rabbs, we look at isolators, and at the end of every presentation, somebody from one of the inspectors would get up and say, why the hell would anybody use a Rabbs? And it's from the turnaround time is usually the reason we see. Initially, Rick Friedman asked me to do a paper on the costs because he thought cost was keeping folks from isolators. And we've never found a client from a cost standpoint. There were other fears. Initially, it was because they didn't think the FDA inspector would understand the technology. That's why we started training all of them, to get them to understand the technology. I think the biggest issue is a misperception that the turnaround time for a Rabbs is much faster. And it absolutely is not, especially with the single use, as Pat said. That cuts a lot of time out of it when you don't have to do the sip in the line itself. And with Les can speak to the turnaround time now with the new technologies and with the catalytic converters, SKAN fog, those types of competing technologies, you can get it well under 2 hours. You can't manually clean appropriately and sanitize a machine that fast. So Rabbs is definitely slower. The setup time is slower. The validation is slower because you got to validate the room. There's almost no redeeming factor. And the overall cost, capital cost of a Rabbs facility, I've done 35 analysis every time the isolator facility as a whole is cheaper.
Okay, so Les, let me ask you that question then. So the expense, so the question is how fast from conception to realization then? So isolators got to be winning hands down on this one too, right? You know, build me something, and when do I get it, right?
Right.
So,
I mean, as far as turnaround time, absolutely. You know, cycle times and the technology has improved dramatically. So we're down to, 1-2 hours turnaround time for between batches. It's incredibly fast compared to an entire shift or 2 shifts that it used to be only 5-10 years ago. As far as, the making the decision, there's still a lot of new Rabbs projects out there because they haven't had a chance to talk to Sterling yet before they made their decisions, maybe, I don't know. SKAN actually does quite a few Rabbs retrofits in the US, and I think we've had some very, very successful projects. The interesting thing is, you measure your success based on your customer feedback, and they get feedback in two very different ways. For example, I talked to my director of manufacturing, and I just installed a new Rabbs system, and he says, yeah, my operational efficiency's gone down 1-2% now that I have this barrier in the way. The operators are struggling with some of the unit operations. We have some training issues, but overall I think we're getting pretty close to where we used to be. I consider that a success story. You walk down the hallway and talk to his quality person and said, how do you feel about the fact that we've put Rabbs in your facility now? And they say, oh my gosh, it's night and day. I used to spend all my time chasing down environmental excursions, doing all this investigation work. Cost me tens of thousands, $50,000, $100,000. We're throwing out batches, all this stuff. I haven't had to throw out one batch or investigate one environmental excursion since I've deployed my Rabbs retrofit. Most of the time, though, even those companies who really embrace that Rabbs technology start to quickly see the light and realize that when they're expanding into their next capacity, they were using that as a stopgap measure. They needed to use that as an engineered solution to respond typically to a FDA 483 or some other warning letter or some sort of regulatory pressure that they were getting that finally got them to move. But then once they moved, invariably we have seen the next filling lines they've installed be isolators, without question.
Hey, but while we're on the topic of regulatory, and this is something I discussed with Sterling a couple of times, is the room classifications on an even keel here. What's been your experience? I know Sterling and I have a very strong sense of where we're failing. Where are you at on this one? I mean, or when you classify a room here, or if you got you're doing global work, I mean, how does it work out? You see you understand the question, right?
I think so.
Good.
I think with isolators, it actually lessens the complexity by quite a bit. It's pretty clear in both the Orange Book and FDA guidance. Here's what you have to do for an isolator, and it's really the ISO 8 background. If you start looking into what do I have to do for a Rabbs or even closed, open, or even an existing conventional line that may still be running, it starts to get very confusing when you move into the ISO 6, ISO 5 areas. You have almost some contradictory information between the two guidances, and it's tough. I think to have a global facility these days and be running ISO 5, it almost makes a company have to harmonize with an environmental standard for their own site, really, and to try and interpret the at-rest and dynamic, the 5 micron, 0.5 micron. It's a challenge. So again, another benefit of isolators is it really simplifies that whole process. In our facility, the best room we have in our facility is the ISO 7 room. And I have to say I like it. I don't want an ISO 5 room. I don't want to be wasting money on gowns. I don't want to be blowing energy. Our energy costs aren't through the roofs, running full ceiling HEPAs. So for me, who came from running conventional lines many years ago, isolation, I would never want to go back. To me, there's no benefit to what was done conventionally or even in Rabbs. To have an operator have to be gowned up all day, sitting in there. Our operators are comfortable, they're doing their jobs. The line is so automated that we can run our line completely with 3 people. And we can run it all day, and no one has to gown out for lunch or bathroom breaks or whatnot. So again, the benefits of that type of operation are huge. In going back to the air classifications, it's very simple. Both guidances essentially say the same thing.
I would be remiss without letting Sterling chime in here.
Yeah, there is no harmony between the FDA and the rest of the world. And so we're trying to get at the last ISPE guide that's out there currently is absolutely horrendous, doesn't meet either of them. So within 6 months, there's a new ISPE guide that's going to come out that does harmonize it and does it from the most economic standpoint. So people historically trying to match the EU guidance and the FDA guidance end up with extra classification grades. And every time you have a new class, you got to do an improvement step in between. And so the equivalent is you come out of the locker rooms into a CNC and then into a grade D and then into a C and then into a B and then into an A. Some people still say A's. Some FDA allows for ISO 5, 6, and 7 in the fill room, but EU won't allow. We have 2 clients that the EU just shut down because they were ISO 5, and folks aren't allowed in an ISO 5 or grade A environment. So here, the much better room than the ISO 7 background, but they shut them down because they didn't want people in that background. So we're getting to the point where up until about 6 months ago, the agencies didn't even think they had a problem in harmonization. Now they understand what the issue is.
So we hear about the ISPE, the guides. Is there other guidance that's coming up, Pat, that we should be aware of?
Well,
On aseptic, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the FDA guidance is reaching its mature years. It's now 12 years old since the last change. And of course, prior to that, it was 1987 to 2004. So I've heard some talk that they're beginning to look at that and update it. And of course, EU is working on the next revision to Annex 1. And I think it may be even out for some comment at this point. So that will come out soon. And both those guidances really are the drivers for compliance in aseptic. I'd say the agency guidance has stood up pretty well. The isolator appendix is still pretty accurate. I think it's probably a little vague these days in some areas, but it stood up for the most part pretty well. I think, and I've told this to Rick, is that one of the issues is that to drive people into isolator technology is to provide some advantages to using that technology. If you look at the guidance today, there really is no particular regulatory advantage to having an isolator, from maybe reducing the media fill requirements to things like that. And I've suggested that to him, is if the technology is as good as you say it is, which from Rick's standpoint, we shouldn't have to do as much. The risk of a positive in a media fill goes much lower in an isolator. So do we need to do it as frequently as twice a year in an isolator? Maybe that needs to be revisited. I'm often amused by the irony of all the environmental monitoring that we have to do in an isolator, which causes interventions to do it. Does that make sense? To stop a fill line solely to do some environmental monitoring, which any agency person who's knowledgeable will say it's not a good idea to go into the gloves of an isolator. They'd rather you not. But yet the guidance forces you to do that many times. We actually have to stop our line to do environmental monitoring. What's the benefit of that? So I think there's things like that that need to be looked at on the next go around.
Okay, so we got potential for guidance. All right, going to be wrapping it up here, but big question. Next big thing in aseptic. What is it? Pops into your head. Les, what's the next big thing?
I think there's going to be many more processes that get isolated. With the advent of rapid sterilization cycles measured in the tens of minutes rather than the hours, there's going to be more temperature labile material that's going to want to be processed in an isolator. People are going to start looking at risky open aseptic operations and starting to isolate them rather than doing those open aseptic manipulations in the conventional clean room or under a hood.
Thanks, Lynn. Matt?
It may not be the next thing, but I think at some point in time we'll see the elimination of the glove port from an isolator. And by doing that, I think maybe 10, 15 years from now, you're going to see a lot more use of robotics to do manipulations within an isolator. The glove port today is the weak point, okay? Always a concern when regulators come in to inspect the facility is, are you integrity testing your glove ports? What happens when there's a tear? So I think over time, we'll see glove ports gone. I don't know how long it will take, but my prediction is it will happen. And in the future, everything that happens inside that isolator will be done by robotics.
I'll go with a bigger picture and talk about the business aspect. And one big change we'll see, I think, is the biggest problem facing this country is the drug shortage right now. And we're seeing a lot of new startup companies, a lot of changes around that, but the whole economic system has to change a bit. And there's a talk tomorrow that Russ is going to lead, thinking about 11 o'clock, Dr. Steven Spielberg, who was former deputy commissioner of the FDA, head of some research at J&J and Merck, and a phenomenally brilliant person is going to speak on a solution that they've developed for that drug shortage and an approach from a manufacturing standpoint. So it'll be very interesting to come by and see that tomorrow.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen.
Yep.
That's it.
Thank you.
Pharmaceutical Processing, in conjunction with INTERPHEX 2016, presents INTERPHEX Live.